You think your intelligence protects you. It doesn't. It isolates you first, then it tempts you. Then it quietly begins to rot. The higher your cognitive ability, the more refined your self-image becomes. You start to believe you are immune to the mechanisms that control other people. You assume that because you can detect manipulation, you cannot be manipulated. That assumption is the fracture line. This is where the collapse begins. You have felt it. The distance. Conversations that once stimulated you now exhaust you. You see logical inconsistencies instantly. You predict outcomes before others finish their sentences. You watch entire rooms nod in agreement with statements that are visibly weak, emotionally charged, strategically convenient. And you stand there thinking, how can they not see this? What you don't notice is that the same process is happening inside you. You are not outside the system. You are simply in a different layer of it. Intelligence increases pattern recognition, but it also increases ego attachment to being right. The smarter you are, the more identity you build around that fact. You do not just think clearly. You see yourself as someone who thinks clearly. And once identity attaches to cognition, your mind stops being a tool and becomes a fortress. That fortress does not protect truth. It protects you. This is the uncomfortable part. Intelligent people do not become stupid because they lose IQ. They become stupid because they defend identity. They confuse mental speed with mental independence. They confuse education with immunity. They confuse articulation with depth. And slowly, without noticing, they begin filtering reality through what maintains internal stability rather than what is accurate. You have seen people dismiss evidence that contradicts their worldview. You have seen educated professionals defend positions that collapse under mild scrutiny. You have seen rational men become emotionally rigid the moment their beliefs are threatened. And you told yourself they were not as intelligent as you thought. That explanation is convenient. It preserves your hierarchy. It keeps you safe. But what if intelligence makes surrender easier? The more capable the mind, the more capable it is of rationalizing its own submission. A dull mind repeats slogans because it does not know better. A sharp mind repeats slogans because it has learned how to justify them. It can construct elaborate explanations for why doubt is unnecessary. It can build entire philosophical frameworks to protect fragile assumptions. It can disguise fear as conviction. And fear is the root. Not fear of being wrong, fear of losing structure, fear of losing belonging, fear of standing alone without a system to stabilize you. Intelligence does not remove that fear. It intensifies it. Because the more you understand complexity, the more you crave certainty. The world becomes chaotic, ambiguous, unstable. Intelligence exposes how fragile systems are. That awareness is heavy. Most people cannot tolerate it for long, so they trade autonomy for relief. This trade does not feel like surrender. It feels like clarity. You align with an ideology, a political movement, a moral framework, a dominant narrative. You tell yourself you have evaluated it critically. You convince yourself you arrived there independently. But what actually happened is quieter. You selected the structure that reduced your internal anxiety the fastest, and once selected, your intelligence went to work defending it. Now you are not thinking to discover truth. You are thinking to maintain coherence. This is where intelligent men become dangerous, not because they lack knowledge, but because they weaponize it. They use facts selectively. They dismiss contradictions as trivial. They attack dissent not with rage, but with condescension. They believe they are guardians of reason while slowly surrendering their independence. And the more articulate they are, the harder it is to detect. You are not immune to this. In fact, if you are watching this and thinking of someone else, that is the first warning sign. The collapse of intelligence does not begin with ignorance. It begins with certainty. The moment you feel internally settled, emotionally secure in your conclusions, unwilling to let destabilizing information in, your cognitive decline has already started. You can still quote studies. You can still win debates. You can still dominate conversations. But you are no longer thinking freely. You are protecting territory. And once intelligence becomes territorial, it stops evolving. This is why the smartest men often become the most rigid. Their self-image cannot afford revision. Too much status is attached. Too much pride is invested. Admitting error would not just adjust a belief, it would fracture identity. So the mind chooses preservation over accuracy. And because it is intelligent, it does so elegantly. You believe stupidity is loud. It is not. It is structured. It is defended. It is confident. It speaks in complete sentences and carries credentials. It does not look confused. It looks certain. That is why it spreads. And that is why you must confront a question you have been avoiding. If intelligence alone is not protection, then what is? What prevents the mind from surrendering itself to comfort, to belonging, to power structures that reward obedience over independence? What keeps cognition from slowly bending toward whatever stabilizes ego? You assume you are thinking freely right now. You assume your positions are yours. You assume your convictions are self-generated. You might be wrong. And if you are wrong, your intelligence will be the last thing that admits it. We will go deeper. But first understand this. The threat is not outside you. It is not ignorance in the masses. It is not propaganda alone. The threat is the quiet moment when your mind chooses psychological safety over uncomfortable truth and then constructs a flawless argument to justify the choice. That moment is almost impossible to detect unless you are willing to dismantle yourself. What you are witnessing is not a collapse of intelligence. It is a shift in allegiance. The mind stops serving truth and starts serving stability. That shift is subtle. It does not announce itself. It disguises itself as maturity, conviction, moral clarity. But internally, something precise has happened. Your ego has taken control of cognition. Ego defense is not arrogance, it is protection. When a belief becomes fused with identity, any challenge to that belief feels like a threat to survival. The body reacts accordingly. Heart rate increases. Muscles tighten. Attention narrows. You think you are debating ideas. Your nervous system thinks you are being attacked. And once the body enters defense mode, intelligence no longer explores. It fortifies. This is why facts fail. Not because they are weak, but because they arrive too late. The emotional system has already decided that change equals loss. Loss of status, loss of belonging, loss of internal order. So the mind deploys what it does best: rationalization. It reframes contradictory evidence as biased. It reinterprets criticism as hostility. It upgrades stubbornness into principle. You have done this, not publicly, internally. You have felt the moment when new information created discomfort, and your first impulse was not curiosity, but resistance. That resistance is not stupidity, it is fear of fragmentation. Because deep down, You know how much of your life is built on the assumption that you are coherent, intelligent, consistent. If one pillar collapses, what else follows? This is identity fragmentation. It happens when your internal narrative becomes too rigid to adapt. You built a story about who you are, rational, informed, independent. But independence requires constant revision. It requires the humility to dismantle your own conclusions. Most men do this early in life. Fewer continue doing it once status is attached to their views. The older the identity, the more expensive the correction. Now add group dynamics. Intelligence rarely operates in isolation. It operates inside networks, professional circles, political tribes, religious communities, online ecosystems. Each one rewards alignment. Each one punishes deviation. And the punishment is subtle. Social cooling, exclusion, mockery, silence. You feel it immediately. The human brain is wired to detect belonging threats faster than logical inconsistency. So what happens? Strategic withdrawal. You stop voicing doubts that could destabilize your position. You adjust language to maintain approval. You refine arguments to protect group cohesion. You tell yourself you are being pragmatic. But over time, pragmatism becomes self-censorship. Self-censorship becomes internal distortion. Eventually, you forget which thoughts were originally yours. This is how intelligent men become vessels for systems they once believed they were analyzing objectively. The danger is not that you will become uninformed. It is that you will become strategically blind. You will only see what maintains your standing. You will only investigate what confirms your alignment. You will start mistaking repetition for depth. And because you are capable, articulate, educated, no one will question you. In fact, they will elevate you. Status accelerates cognitive decay when ego is unexamined. You may think this is about politics or ideology. It is not limited to that. It appears in corporate hierarchies, in academic institutions, in activist movements, in entrepreneurial circles, in any environment where identity merges with narrative. The moment your intelligence becomes an asset within a system, it becomes vulnerable to capture. This is why stupidity spreads fastest among the capable. The incapable lack influence. The capable legitimize the narrative. They provide the language, the statistics, the moral framing. They make surrender look intelligent. And because they believe they are acting independently, they cannot detect the possession. Here is the uncomfortable layer beneath that: irrelevance. Intelligent men fear becoming invisible. They fear losing impact. When a rising power structure offers influence in exchange for alignment, the trade feels reasonable. You tell yourself you can maintain independence internally while cooperating externally. But gradual compromise reshapes cognition. You adapt to survive. You adapt to matter. Wasted potential is more painful than error. So you attach yourself to something larger than you. A movement, a cause, a dominant narrative. It provides momentum. It provides audience. It provides validation. And in return, it requires loyalty. Once loyalty is internalized, independence becomes betrayal. If this level of thinking feels rare in your environment, subscribe. Not for agreement, for friction. Most men avoid this conversation because it destabilizes comfort. If you are still here, you are not looking for comfort. Now understand the deeper layer. Emotional fatigue. Constant independent thinking is exhausting. Evaluating evidence from first principles is cognitively expensive. Doubt consumes energy. Ambiguity drains clarity. Over time, the brain seeks shortcuts. Heuristics replace analysis. Authority replaces investigation. Consensus replaces scrutiny. Not because you are incapable, because you are tired. Mental fatigue makes surrender attractive, and modern environments amplify this fatigue intentionally. Information overload, rapid news cycles, algorithmic reinforcement, continuous outrage. The mind cannot process everything, so it selects a lane. Once selected, it defends it to reduce cognitive load. Certainty feels like relief. Certainty feels like control. But certainty is often just closure. This is the partial revelation you need to confront. Intelligence without disciplined detachment becomes a liability. The sharper the mind, the more convincing its self-deception. The more refined the language, the harder it is to detect manipulation. The more confident the posture, the less likely anyone challenges it. You are not at risk of becoming ignorant. You are at risk of becoming convinced. And conviction, when fused with ego and reinforced by group approval, is almost impossible to penetrate. The next question is not whether this process exists. It does. The question is whether you are already inside it without realizing it. And if you are, what would it cost you to step outside? At some point, the version of you that once felt solid begins to crack. Not publicly, internally. The arguments you used to deliver with confidence start to feel rehearsed. The certainty that once energized you now feels heavy. You notice repetition in your own thinking. The same phrases, the same frameworks, the same conclusions. Nothing evolves. You defend positions more than you examine them. That is not stability. That is stagnation. The old identity model no longer functions, but you keep running it because it once gave you power. It gave you clarity. It gave you belonging. Now it gives you friction. Conversations feel predictable. Opposition feels scripted. Even your own reactions feel automatic. You are not thinking. You are responding. And somewhere beneath that automation, something quieter is asking a question you do not want to hear. What if the structure you built to protect your independence has become the very thing limiting it? Most men misinterpret this phase. They think the discomfort means they are surrounded by fools. They think the isolation confirms superiority. They double down on detachment. They withdraw emotionally. They reduce engagement. They convince themselves they are above the noise. But withdrawal is not always elevation. Sometimes it is collapse. There is a difference between solitude and avoidance. Solitude is deliberate. Avoidance is defensive. When your beliefs stop evolving, you stop exposing them to real friction. You curate your inputs. You select environments that confirm rather than challenge. You tell yourself you are protecting your time. In reality, you are protecting your ego. And the ego, when unchallenged, becomes brittle. This is the collapse of the old self. Not dramatic, not explosive, gradual. You begin to notice that your internal world is smaller than it used to be. You are less curious, more reactive, less exploratory, more dismissive. Intelligence remains intact, but flexibility decreases. Without flexibility, intelligence turns into rigidity. Rigidity feels like strength. It is not. It is fear of destabilization. You may interpret your increasing distance from others as evidence of growth. Sometimes it is. Often it is insulation. When you stop allowing your views to be stress tested, you are not refining them. You are embalming them. They stop breathing. They stop adapting. And because you built your identity around being rational, you cannot see the decay. The outer shell looks polished. Here is the pressure point. If the old structure collapses completely, you will feel exposed, uncertain, temporarily without narrative. That is intolerable for most men. So they rebuild quickly. They attach to a new ideology, a new framework, a new dominant voice that offers clean explanations. The rebuilding is rushed because uncertainty feels like weakness. But rushed reconstruction is dangerous. If you rebuild incorrectly, you harden into something even more rigid than before. You become the man who cannot be reached, the one who interprets every disagreement as threat, the one who speaks in absolutes because ambiguity feels like erosion. You may gain short-term confidence. You lose long-term evolution. There is a quieter path. It requires you to endure the unstable middle, to sit in the space where you no longer fully trust your previous conclusions, but have not yet adopted new ones. This phase feels like loss of identity. In reality, it is identity restructuring. The mind is clearing outdated architecture. It is uncomfortable because control decreases temporarily. Most men do not tolerate this phase long enough. They either retreat into old certainty or leap into new dogma. Both choices restore immediate stability. Neither builds depth. The rare move is to remain in disciplined uncertainty, to examine each belief without hostility, to detach ego from conclusion, to admit internally that you might have been partially captured by systems you thought you were analyzing objectively. This is not weakness. It is structural repair. Notice your reactions right now. Are you defensive? Are you searching for examples of other people who fit this description? Or are you scanning your own history? The direction of your attention tells you everything. Comment the city you are watching from. I want to see where men are going through this quietly, not for visibility, for data. Patterns matter. The collapse of the old self is not the end, but it is a narrowing corridor. If you walk through it carelessly, you rebuild another prison. If you avoid it, you decay. If you endure it deliberately, something different forms, something less reactive, less dependent on approval, less attached to being right, but you are not there yet. Right now you are in tension. The old framework feels unstable. The new one has not formed. The temptation to grasp at certainty is increasing. And the longer you stay in this pressure, the more your discipline is tested. Most men fail here, not because they are incapable, because they are impatient. And impatience, in this phase, determines whether you evolve or simply rebrand your rigidity. There is a temptation now to blame something external for the instability you feel. The culture, the algorithms, the institutions, the political climate, the noise, all of that plays a role, but none of it is decisive without your participation. Systems influence. They do not control without consent. At some point, you agreed, maybe subtly, maybe unconsciously, but you agreed. Victimhood at this level is sophisticated. It does not look like weakness. It looks like analysis. You can outline how media distorts narratives. You can explain how power structures manipulate mass psychology. You can break down incentive systems with precision. And while you are explaining all of that, you avoid examining your own compliance. That avoidance is the final shield of the ego. If you remain focused on external forces, you never have to confront internal indiscipline, because this is where it becomes uncomfortable. Independent thinking is not a personality trait. It is a discipline. It requires cognitive control, the ability to pause emotional reaction before constructing belief, the ability to tolerate uncertainty without rushing toward closure, the ability to separate social reward from truth evaluation. These are not intellectual skills. They are behavioral ones. You either train them or you default to drift. Drift feels passive. It is not. It is the slow alignment of your thinking with whatever environment you consume most. If your inputs are emotionally charged, you become reactive. If your inputs are tribal, you become polarized. If your inputs reward certainty, you become rigid. Over time, your mind reshapes itself around repeated exposure. This is not conspiracy. It is conditioning. So the question shifts, not who is manipulating people, but where am I undisciplined? Cognitive control means you do not allow your first emotional response to finalize your position. You observe it. You dissect it. You ask why this particular idea triggered you. Emotional containment means you do not broadcast every reaction. You let it stabilize internally before expression. Behavioral consistency means you apply the same standard of scrutiny to your own side as you do to opponents. Most men fail here. They demand evidence from others and offer intuition from themselves. They criticize bias externally and justify it internally. They condemn propaganda while repeating narratives that benefit their identity. This double standard is subtle. It feels justified, but it erodes integrity. Without structure, collapse turns into decay. If you dismantle your old identity without replacing it with disciplined habits, you will not become freer. You will become unstable. Skepticism without structure becomes cynicism. Independence without standards becomes isolation. Detachment without purpose becomes apathy. You cannot simply tear down. You must rebuild with control. That requires restraint. You must limit your informational diet intentionally, not to avoid opposing views, but to avoid emotional saturation. You must create mental space where thinking is slow and deliberate. No performance, no audience, no immediate validation. Just you and the argument in its raw form. If you cannot sit with an idea without broadcasting it, you are still performing. And performance is dependence. Responsibility here is not dramatic. It is daily, small corrections. Catching yourself when you exaggerate to win a point. Noticing when you dismiss something too quickly. Admitting privately when you avoided a challenging source because it threatened your comfort. These moments are unglamorous. They build internal authority. Authority over your own mind. You say you value freedom. But freedom without self-regulation collapses into reaction. Reaction is predictable. Predictable minds are easy to guide. If you cannot regulate your impulses, your intelligence becomes a tool for whatever stimulus hits you hardest. This is where most intelligent men become what they criticize. Not through ignorance, through lack of discipline. Short pause. Ask yourself one direct question. When was the last time you changed your mind on something meaningful without being forced to? If you cannot answer quickly, that is not strength. That is stagnation. You are not a victim of mass psychology unless you refuse to examine your own habits. External forces exist. Yes, but they are amplified by internal laziness. Once you accept that, control returns. Not total control, but enough to prevent drift. This is the intensity point. You either build structure now, or you harden into another articulate participant in collective stupidity. You will sound intelligent, you will feel certain, and you will no longer be thinking freely. The difference between decay and reconstruction is not knowledge. It is discipline applied when no one is watching. The danger was never low intelligence. It was unconscious surrender. The quiet trade you make when certainty feels safer than independence. The subtle shift when your mind stops exploring and starts defending. That is what collapses a man from the inside. Not ignorance, comfort. So reconstruction cannot begin with new beliefs. It begins with subtraction. Eliminate the need to be right in public. Eliminate the reflex to respond immediately. Eliminate the environments that reward outrage and punish nuance. If a system feeds your ego more than it sharpens your thinking, it is not strengthening you. It is domesticating you. Then build deliberately. Build internal friction. Seek arguments that threaten your position without threatening your dignity. Slow your conclusions down. Separate identity from opinion. Your belief is not you. It is a temporary structure you are testing against reality. If it breaks, you adjust. You do not collapse. Build tolerance for ambiguity. The world is complex. Clean narratives are usually incomplete. If an explanation feels too satisfying, inspect it twice. Intelligence matures when it resists emotional sedation. Build controlled solitude. Not isolation driven by superiority, but distance driven by calibration. Time where you think without performing, without signaling allegiance, without anticipating approval. In that space, you regain authorship over your own cognition, and then endure. Endure the discomfort of being misunderstood. Endure the loneliness of refusing easy alignment. Endure the temporary instability that comes when old certainties dissolve. Most men run back to group identity at this stage because silence feels like invisibility. But invisibility during reconstruction is protection. Remember what was collapsing in the beginning, not your intelligence, your independence. The goal was never to become smarter than everyone else. It was to remain internally sovereign in environments that constantly try to absorb you. Sovereignty is quiet. It does not argue for dominance. It does not need to win every exchange. It evaluates. It adjusts. It stands alone when necessary. If you felt isolated for thinking independently, understand something clearly. Isolation is not proof of superiority. It is proof of separation from mass alignment. What you do with that separation determines everything. You can turn it into arrogance and decay, or you can turn it into discipline and depth. Intelligent people become stupid when they stop paying the price of independent thought. The price is discomfort. The price is doubt. The price is social friction. If you are unwilling to pay it, you will outsource your thinking to whatever offers relief. Do not outsource. Reclaim cognitive authority. Guard it without ego. Refine it without attachment. Challenge it without fear. Subscribe if you are building this version of yourself deliberately. Not loudly, not performatively, but with structure. Stay sharp. Stay independent. And when certainty feels seductive, pause long enough to ask who benefits from your comfort. That pause is where your intelligence survives.